This is Unsung History, the podcast where we discuss people and events in American history that haven't always received a lot of attention. I'm your host, Kelly Therese Pollock. I'll start each episode with a brief introduction to the topic, and then talk to someone who knows a lot more than I do. Be sure to subscribe to Unsung History on your favorite podcasting app so you never miss an episode. And please, tell your friends, family, neighbors, colleagues, maybe even strangers to listen to. On this episode, we're looking at the life and career of Anna May Wong. Wong Liu Tsong was born on January 3rd, 1905, in Los Angeles, near Chinatown. Wong's father, Wong Sam-sing, owned a Chinese laundry, and he moved his growing family to a neighborhood further from Chinatown when Liu Tsong was still young, in order to run the laundry there. Liu Tsong and her older sister started at public school, but they were harassed by anti-Chinese racial taunts, so they moved to a Presbyterian Chinese school in Chinatown, where they learned Cantonese in addition to English. At the same time that Liu Tsong was becoming fascinated with motion pictures, the movie industry was looking to Chinatown to provide interesting backdrops for its stories. Liu Tsong Wong spent her limited free time at the movies or hanging around film sets, becoming known by the filmmakers as CCC, Curious Chinese Child. At 14, she was an extra in The Red Lantern, an uncredited part, but one that thrilled her nonetheless. Adopting the name Anna May Wong, she dropped out of high school to pursue an acting career. At 17, she starred in The Toll of the Sea, a silent film version of the Madame Butterfly story set in China. Despite glowing reviews, Wong had trouble finding parts at a time when Hollywood preferred to cast white actors in yellow-face paint instead of Asian actors for the leading Asian roles. Asian Americans, like Wong, were relegated to bit parts and stereotyped roles. In 1924, Wong was cast in a Douglas Fairbanks film, The Thief of Baghdad, where she played a deceitful Mongol slave. Wong tried to start her own production company, Anna May Wong Productions, in an attempt to film less racist stories, but a dishonest business partner sunk the endeavor. Frustrated by Hollywood's racism, Wong accepted a role in Berlin in 1928. She left for Europe, where she found more success, starring among other films in Piccadilly in 1929. While Wong was in Europe, she filmed her first talkie, The Flame of Love, in 1930, where she played the lead. She also starred on stage opposite a young Laurence Olivier. With studio promises of better roles, Wong returned to Hollywood, starring in Daughter of the Dragon in 1931, and Shanghai Express with her friend Marlene Dietrich in 1932. But Hollywood racism still limited her career options and continued to frustrate her. When she was passed up for the lead role in The Good Earth, a role that instead went to a German actress in yellowface, Wong left Hollywood in disgust to travel to China in 1936. In China, Wong was feted, and she won over the Chinese media, which had been disdainful of her stereotypical portrayals in Hollywood. In China, Wong directed and produced a documentary of her trip, which she called My China Film, that includes scenes with her father in their ancestral village and of her fittings for traditional Chinese clothing. 2 decades later, Wong's film, with her added narration, was turned into an episode of Bold Journey on ABC television. When she returned to Hollywood, Wong was finally able to play more nuanced roles, saying of Paramount's 1937 Daughter of Shanghai, where she played opposite her friend, Korean-American Philip Ahn, quote, "I like my part in this picture better than any I've had before, not because it gives me better acting opportunities, nor because the character has exceptional appeal. It's just because the picture gives the Chinese a break. We have the sympathetic parts for a change. To me, that means a great deal." Unquote. During World War II, Wong raised money for Chinese relief, auctioning off costumes and hosting charity events and fundraisers. She also starred in propaganda films, Bombs Over Burma and The Lady from Chungking, that depicted Chinese guerrilla fighters battling with Japanese forces. Although her career waned some after World War II, Wong continued to perform, including on television, where she played an art gallery owner who solved crimes in the one season of The Gallery of Madame Lützong in 1951. It was the first U.S. television series to star an Asian American woman in the lead role. Lützong, of course, was Wong's Chinese name. Sadly, when the Dumont television network folded, they trashed most of their film stock, including The Gallery of Madame Lützong, which is said to be on the bottom of the Hudson River. By this time, Wong was also a landlady, after she bought a Spanish-style house in Santa Monica and divided it into 4 apartments, calling the property Moongate Apartments. She rented out 3 of the units while living in the 4th. In 1960, Wong was the first Asian American actress to be awarded a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. It wasn't until 2019 that the second Asian American actress was awarded a star on the Walk of Fame. That actress was Lucy Liu, who said in her ceremony for her star, quote, "I was lucky that trailblazers like Anna May Wong and Bruce Lee came before me. If my body of work somehow helped bridge the gap between stereotypical roles first given to Anna May and mainstream success today, I'm thrilled to have been part of that process." Unquote. In 1961, Wong was set to make a comeback. Cast as Madame Liang in Rodgers and Hammerstein's Flower Drum Song. Sadly, health problems kept her from taking the role. On February 3rd, 1961, Wong died of a heart attack in her Santa Monica home at the age of only 56. Reportedly, a copy of the Flower Drum Song film script was next to her when she died. In 2022, the United States Mint began issuing Anna May Wong quarters as part of its American Women Quarter series, making Wong the first Asian American to appear on U.S. currency. In 2023, Mattel introduced an Anna May Wong doll into its Barbie's Inspiring Women series, the first Asian American figure in the series. Joining me now is Dr. Yunta Huang, professor of English at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and author of Daughter of the Dragon, Anna May Wong's Rendezvous with American History. First, though, here is a clip of Anna May Wong singing in Cantonese on the Rudy Valley radio show in July 1935.
How yon ye good swing sing a 中准会，好愿一个水晶啊发个发，好愿一个水晶啊发个发，金花月我爱你。Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and friends. It's good to be back in America, and I'm very happy to be amongst those present on Mr. Valley's program tonight. For the benefit of the few who do not understand Chinese, the last number I did was a Chinese folk song entitled A Jasmine Flower.
Hi, Yunta. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you for having me, Kelly.
Yes, I am so excited to learn about Anna May Wong. I want to start by asking you a little bit about how you came to write this book. I know this is the third in what you're calling a trilogy, so I wanted to understand a little bit about the trilogy and why you're writing this book.
Right. So, as you said correctly, that this biography on Anna May Wong is really the third installment of what I want to call Rendezvous with America. I'm a mystery buff, so the Rendezvous at Midnight sort of, but it's more kind of Asian Americans meeting American history in some ways. And so overall, my goal is to tell the Asian American story and share the Asian American experience in the making of American history. But of course, I didn't plan it that way, many years ago. And it's really all thanks to my first book of the trilogy on Charlie Chan. And in that book, as you know, Charlie Chan was a very controversial film character, but it turns out there's actually a real, Cantonese club in Honolulu who inspired the character. So I did that book, and because of, it's about Asian American image and in popular culture and everything, Anna May Wong inevitably will come up in that digging of Asian American history. And so I wrote about, I would say, a page or two about Anna May Wong, just as an example, since, Warner Oland, for instance, who figures quite prominently in my current book on Anna May Wong, was a good friend of Anna May Wong. They pair up in a number of films, in silent films, and later on, especially in this Fu Manchu series, as well as the Charlie Chan series. So they partnered in a number of films, including Shanghai Express with Marlene Dietrich. So anyway, so I had to write a few pages on Anna May Wong. And so the second of the trilogy was Siamese Twins. Once again, because of the Charlie Chan book, I had to go back to 19th century, the Asian American experience, and Chan and Bunker, Siamese twins, really represented the early experience, whereas Charlie Chan represents more kind of 20th century controversy. And so after these two books, it's almost like natural in some ways, how things come together. So I'm quite happy about that and how, the three pieces now finally are together.
So I do want to ask a little bit about your method and the kinds of sources you looked at. I get the impression that you watched a lot of the films, which seems like a fun part of of doing the work. And you talk about how Anna May Wong herself was a writer and wrote a lot. So can you talk some about the things you were able to access while you were putting together this book?
Well, speaking of watching films, and of course I had to watch all of Anna May Wong, Anna May Wong films. But I should tell you, for instance, thanks to Netflix and all that, and all the YouTube, So when I actually was doing, for instance, I'll give you one example. I wasn't born in this country, and I grew up in China. I went to college there, and then came to the United States for graduate school, and then got stuck, and happily in some ways. So I wasn't too familiar with American popular culture to begin with, although I studied American literature. So, for instance, when I was researching for the Siamese Twins book, it turns out, Chan and Bunker, with conjoined bodies, after they made a lot of money, they eventually settled down I'm sorry, it sounds like a digression, but I will come back to it. My students often complain that I ramble, but everything actually is, interconnected. That you asked me about method, and that is really my method of research. How, it's like a detective, right? You follow every clue and every hint, every, smell. Let's just say. So anyway, so China and Bank, the Siamese twins made a lot of money eventually, and they are sick and tired of the public eye. And so they settled, retired from the business of showing their own bodies as in freak shows and all that. And they chose a spot in a very remote area, as you may know, Kelly, in the corner of Western North Carolina. And they settled and married two white sisters, and they had 21 children. Right, amazing story. But it turns out that's how strange American stories often are, is that, Mount Airy, North Carolina, was there where eventually settled and have kids, raising kids and living on two farms. But it turns out it's also the birthplace of Andy Griffith. And that was the basis of, Mayberry, the Andy Griffith Show. Not having grown up in this country, as you know, I've never seen any Andy Griffith show except occasionally, the reruns on TV. So because I was doing research, of course, I had to watch like 249 episodes of all of them. Speaking of binge watching, because I didn't really want to miss any possible connection, right? As a writer, I'm pretty thorough. As a cultural historian, I'm pretty thorough digging, any connection, any clue, and so yeah, 249. So compared to that, 60 or so Animal One films was a piece of cake.
I love that. So let's talk a little bit about the Southern California that Anna May Wong was born into. So she is born in early 1905, and it's a quite a racist country, especially in California, especially toward Chinese Americans at this time. Can you talk a little bit about that culture she's born into and how that affects her life?
Right. I mean, today people look at California as as the bluest state in the union. You can't imagine even late 19th century, early 20th century, as you say, turn of the century California or Southern California wasn't really a great place for Asians by any means. I mean, I can give you a few examples. The anti-Chinese violence after the gold rush, right? I described that in actually all three of my books because that's very important, chapter of Asian American experience. So when Anna May Wong was born in Los Angeles, she was born in her father's laundry, right? Steam and starch. And laundry, interestingly, I'll just give you an example, what kind of sentiment, overall general sentiment toward Chinese. A lot of cities in California will not allow Chinese to live, outside of Chinatown. Unless, for instance, give you an example, in San Francisco, right, at the time, Chinamen, so-called, were not allowed to live, beyond Chinatown, with one exception, that if you run a laundromat, then you can do your business and live in there as well. So they were like sort of like the vanguard, pioneers moving out of Chinatown. So when Anna May Wong was growing up, yes, she actually grew up outside of Chinatown, although close enough to enable the family to go back to Chinatown for communal connection, grocery shopping, and food and everything, language, school. So she started out going to public school, and then it's not going to happen. So her parents send them, her and her sister back to Chinatown for a few years before they were strong enough as children to handle that kind of all the bullying and everything. So that wasn't very kind of friendly environment. And of course, California is also considered what is called the garrison state, right? Because this is where, the continental limit of European civilization will meet the other side, which is Hawaii and the Polynesians, and ultimately Asia. It's the last, defense line against the other side. So that mentality was deep rooted in California, Golden State, and it really shows up again, especially during World War II after Pearl Harbor. The internment of Japanese Americans was really a symptom that this is the final line, right? So Japanese Americans living on the West Coast will be sent to camps. But of course, if you're back in New York or something, if you're Japanese, then you're fine. So that really shows a lot of kind of the local culture and the history and the general sentiment and attitude toward Asian Americans.
That attitude then spills over into Hollywood. And so, despite there's a ton of movies being made about Asian Americans, and yet Anna May Wong has trouble getting roles, especially starring roles. Can you talk a little bit about that tension and what's going on there that means that she's often, especially at the beginning of her career, relegated to sort of sideline roles or evil roles?
Right. Well, in some sense, she was lucky. It's hard to put it that way, but it is true because when Hollywood was rising as an industry, as a place, and a state of mind, eventually, that strangely, especially the early films, the silent films, as you know, oftentimes um, the director would just put a camera, a still camera, just static, put it there, and just take in the scenes. And the Chinatown became a very kind of almost ready-made set for those early films. So that's something I write about a little bit. It's actually the what I call the umbilical cord that ties Hollywood to Chinatown in many ways. So not just the street scene, but also laundry. How mechanical the labor was, robotic, and also the fear the Chinese, they are so hardworking, but also they don't get tired. That kind of exaggeration, right? Racist attitude. And what I call the techno-Orientalism. And that on the one hand, they're beasts, they're animals, and they're almost like subhuman in a sense, their capacity to handle pain, for instance. So some of the earlier films, if you to look at them, unfortunately, they are all hidden and stored away in vaults because studios are afraid to let them out, for obvious reasons. They're very racist. And if you look at those early ones, there was a lot of violence against like Asian bodies, and these are all kind of what I call the ready-made footage, and it doesn't require a lot of editing almost. And so in that sense, Hollywood was always in Chinatown in those early years. So in that sense, Anna May Wong was lucky because she didn't have to go to Hollywood. Hollywood came to her. Unlike what we call the movie girls in the early days, right? A lot of young American women were from going anywhere, small town Midwest, Chicago, Illinois, or Ohio. They will buy one-way train ticket to come to California, step off Union Station, and hoping for something. And that's not the case. Anyone did not have to buy a train ticket for that matter, and the bus will come to Chinatown to hire the extras and all that. As you know, that's how she actually started out, and her first appearance was in the 1919 Red Lantern, and she was the kind of uncredited extra as a lantern carrier. She actually couldn't recognize her own face in the crowd, but she was very proud of it. So in that environment, she rose, and like you said, on the one hand, there's fascination with Chinatown, the exoticism and the shops, the curio shops, the dark alleys, the smell, and everything. That's one fascination. On the other hand, as you know, America or Hollywood has a long history of yellow face or red face, white actors playing colored roles. So throughout her career, you always see this paradox, and that really I'm interested in that paradox because that says a lot about America in the sense how America is sort of like at war with itself. They like one thing, but they also hate something else. The same thing. So Anna May Wong, for instance, because of her beauty, her talent, and everything. So what they at the time called the China flick, or even so yellow flicks, it means Chinese themes, films. It's not possible they don't have Anna May Wong because she was the biggest star later on. But on the other hand, she could not have the lead roles because of the Hollywood racism, the Hays Code, and everything. So it's interesting. You want one thing, on the other hand, you can't have that.
Yeah, can you talk about the role of the anti-miscegenation laws too, and how that affected the kind of roles she was able to get?
Right. So it does not just, what I call the virtual form of foot binding, really, right? Because the Hays Code or the earlier, kind of industry rules would not allow interracial kissing, for instance. And kiss, as you know, as some film historians say, is really the face and soul of 20th century love. Without romantic kissing, rom-com will never happen. And because of that, it's like small technical detail that really dooms her career to a great extent. And so that's really kind of virtual form of foot binding. But then we can't forget we are talking about a real human being, and the anti-miscegenation law not just applies to film, it applies to reality as well. So interracial marriage was not recognized at the time, and it wasn't until 1967, right? Loving versus Virginia eventually kind of regarded miscegenation laws unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. And at the time of that ruling, there were still 16 states in the union where anti-miscegenation law was still on the books. So if you look at her personal life, so I spent actually a lot of time trying to describe, what was it like when she was, I would say, aged. Okay, in later part of her life, well, was quite tragic, right? I think had much to do, of course, with the anti-miscegenation law. She can't marry a white man. She could have romance, but couldn't. Her good friend, James Wong Howe, a very famous photographer who won Oscar twice, he married his Caucasian wife in France because it was not going to happen in the United States, and they came back, lived in the United States in California, but they were afraid to let their marriage become public. So that the depth of tragedy, people are drawn, of course, to spectacles, and her story is a spectacular story of a Chinese woman rising from her father's laundry to become a global celebrity. And people are drawn to that kind of, a shine and a spectacle. But I'm very interested, in digging what's underneath, the depth and the length of her struggle and the depth of that tragedy and what it says about us and all that.
So she goes to Europe then because she's having trouble with her career in the United States. And this is not uncommon. Of course, there are other entertainers and writers and artists who did the same thing. Can you talk a little bit about that? This is, sort of immediately before Nazism is rising in Germany, and she's in Germany and she's enjoying her time in Germany. Right. And able to make movies there. What was that like? And she does a lot of like learning languages to be able to work there. What was that part of her life like?
Yes. So because of she was fed up with Hollywood, and she will actually later on she'll run away again. But her first runaway was to Europe, as you pointed out, in 1928, and she arrived, Weimar Republic, right? It was a short-lived kind of golden period in Germany before the rise of the Nazis, as you said, and that also kind of that story, that experience, how she rose, in Europe. The irony here is this: that basically she went to Europe to be recognized as American. Because in the United States she's just Chinese, she's not really American, right? And so when she went to Europe, people recognize her as an American star, an actress from Hollywood. That's actually how she was hired, because Germany was trying to compete with Hollywood. And what is the best way to go to our Hollywood, our American? And strangely, they found a Chinese star, right? And of course, racism against Asians is a different kind of, I think, I wouldn't say different level, but it's a different kind of historical experience. Chinatown in Germany didn't really exist. It's a very small kind of yellow quarter, so-called. And so she became a star in Europe, using, again, her exoticism, and people are attracted to exoticism. So what like, what was she in the eye of Europeans at the time? That's a very interesting question, right? Because we know what she was in America at the time. People look at her, she's just Chinese girl, right? And in Europe, however, strangely, she embodies China, old, Middle Kingdom, and as well as California. And so that's a kind of interesting mix. And you can say it's sort of like a misrecognition, but it's a willful misrecognition from the European side. So, for instance, the people often ask me, like, what is my favorite Animal Wang film, right? I was anticipating that question. I might as well answer that right now. Piccadilly, 1929. And this is really the swan song of the silent era. It's a silent film. And because she was away from Hollywood and somewhat, distanced from the constraints of Hollywood, I wouldn't say Britain allowed her to do whatever she wanted. Actually, it's not the case at all. But at least she enjoys certain kind of freedom. In the same way as you mentioned, her trajectory, like going to Europe, is no it's quite common to some extent. Josephine Baker, right, was a totally comparable case. So in Piccadilly, she was playing, the uptown, the West End, and the East End, the Limehouse and the posh clubbing scene and everything, the contrast. So she was able, in real life and also in the film especially, kind of shuttle between these two sides. And she was able to do all the dance. And so I think that going to Europe really allowed her to mature and to be recognized as a real talent, a global star. So and that really helped her, her second part of her career when she came back to Hollywood.
So you just mentioned that that was the end of the silent era, and she's able to make that transition then into the talkies as they start. But she had to really work at it, right? Can you talk a little bit about that transition, which a lot of actresses and actors were not able to make, and she is able to make it, but it's not easy.
Absolutely, and then once again it shows how not just how talented she was, but the tenacity. And she really worked hard. So she survived the transition, unlike many silent stars who fell, on the side. She was able to make the transition to from silent film to talkie, and later on, once again, she was able to make the transition from film to television. That's the later part of her career. But back to this transition, yes, so she left California, went to Europe. So Piccadilly was silent film, and she was able to do, all the acting without having to say a line, speak a line. But then she was immediately hired to, because her ambition was always in theater, actually, stage, kind of serious, high art. So she was, after Piccadilly, she had the lead role in the Circle of Chalk. Was based on an old kind of Chinese play, translated into German, and then retranslated into English. And so, without any theatrical, kind of professional training, because of her talent in Piccadilly, she was given this lead role, playing Hai Tang. And imagine the effect. So it's like if you suddenly turn on the volume on on a silent film. So critics were shocked. On the one hand, they thought she was great, acting, the emotional crying and everything. But the minute she opened her mouth, the California twang came out. And as you know, especially in theater, British accent is, hardly sought after. I learned my lesson when I first got out of graduate school in Buffalo and went to teach at Harvard, my first teaching job. And I heard a lot of British accents. And then when I dug a little deeper, they just go to good old Americans, kind of feigning the kind of British accent, a tiny bit, a little touch. It's like food, you add a little soy sauce, a pinch of salt will change the dynamics, right? So she immediately realized in order to survive the transition, she needed, coaching, tutoring. So she spent a lot of money hiring a coach from Oxford. And so she left California with a strong California accent, kind of, a Central Valley girl accent. And when she returned to America in 1930, she was speaking with a kind of almost like high class British accent. So that's how she kind of fashioned herself. So she's a very hard worker, certainly.
Yeah, and then one of the movies, I think that final movie she made in Europe, she did in 3 different languages.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing.
Oh, absolutely. She's such, in my book, I call her the star coolie, right? The coolie labor, but she's a star coolie. It's kind of it's sort of, it's twisted term. And yes, she picked up German and she also picked up French. And usually when they make these multilingual films, and usually they have a total different cast for each film, a language film. At the time, it was France, Germany, and UK. They joined forces together, trying to compete with Hollywood. And Netflix today, for instance, they do that, right? In the same story but told in different countries, and they have a total different cast, right? But because of Anime One was so hardworking, and she was able to pull it off, the studios really took advantage of her. I think it's really exploitation, of course, but she was also, proud and happy to do it, that she was able to pull it off in 3 different languages. But of course, eventually, when its taping is done, she really need to go to some place to recover because it's so exhausting and everything.
You mentioned that this was her first running away from Hollywood. So the second one, of course, she goes to China, and she's Chinese American, but had never been there before to China. So can you talk a little bit about that? That trip seems so formative then to the rest of her life after that. Can you talk about that trip, what she was hoping to do, and what she experienced while she was there?
Right. So after success in Europe, she came back and was given, some important roles, lead roles, including Daughter of Dragon, in which she actually had the lead role. And then was in Shanghai Express, playing second fiddle to Marlene Dietrich, although she was great. Despite all that, she was never able to find a lead role again for quite a number of years. But there's one role she really wanted badly, and that would have made a huge difference for her career, was The Good Earth, based on Pearl Buck's, Pulitzer Prize-winning novel. And that was like the biggest China movie. It's like Barbie and Oppenheimer today. Everybody was talking about it way before, the movie came out, and it was a big budget film. And she really wanted the Olan role, Chinese peasant woman. But of course, it was given away to an Austrian actress, Louise Rayner. Although to Rayner's credit, she actually won Oscar for it. But that's Hollywood culture. That yellow face was still trendy, and there was still the must-do thing, right? And really, that really broke Anime One's heart and spirit, and she was really fed up. So she left for China because her family, her father especially, had retired to China, and along with her other siblings. So she wanted to go see China, her fatherland. She had represented all these years without knowingly. So anyway, so she went there in 1936, and she initially she wanted to spend 6 months, but she ended up actually spending 9 months and visiting quite a number of cities, and she met her father and everything. But there's one kind of a purpose of her trip, going back to her interest, commitment to theater. She really wanted to bring Chinese opera, Peking opera, and this Chinese style opera to the West. And I think professionals are still trying to figure out how to do it today, even because Chinese opera is so different from, say, Italian opera. But it's a honorable, long, rich history. But in terms of cultural translation, it's kind of hard to do. So she was very devoted to that, and she spent a lot of time in Shanghai and Peking trying to learn from the masters. So her purpose was to bring Chinese theater to the West and present it to the world. But she ended up, unfortunately, buying a lot of costumes, Chinese theatrical costumes, because she realized Chinese theater is such a difficult art that especially you need to be fluent in Mandarin Chinese or whatever dialect you speak, or the operas. That's because there's a diverse, a great variety of operas, like such Cantonese opera, there's Peking opera, there's Huang Mei Xi, or Kunqu, and all that. And most of the operas are regional and require, a local dialect. Peking opera requires Mandarin Chinese, and Anime Wang, despite the fact that she went to Chinese school in her early years, she spoke mostly Cantonese. Mandarin was still kind of sketchy a little bit. So without that linguistic skill, it's not possible. The enunciation and everything, it's just not possible. So she realized that there's a limit to what she could do, but she ended up buying a lot of costumes, like I said, and did a lot of research, bought a lot of books, and she's a really serious student, and brought everything back to California.
It's shortly after that World War II starts, or at least the Japanese invasion of China, and then eventually what leads to World War II. Can you talk a little bit about Anime Wang and what she's doing during World War II, and really trying to raise awareness of what's happening in China and raise funds for China?
Right. So World War II began much earlier, in Asia than anywhere else. The Japanese invasion, in 1937, and actually, two of her siblings were in Shanghai when Shanghai was bombed. But fortunately, her siblings were fine or managed to get out safely. So during in that period, that's the other aspect of my book, is that the nitty gritty details lie underneath the spectacle. For instance, because she was Chinese and the Japanese invasion and the outbreak of the full scale war inevitably will involve her in terms of fundraising and in Chinatown, in LA, and speaking out against Japanese and everything, right? So people might think, okay, she's Asian American, then we are all in this together. But no, during World War II, of course, Chinese try to distance in California, try to distance themselves from Japanese, especially during the internment, right? And Chinese will wear labels and buttons say I'm Chinese or I'm not Japanese, trying to distance themselves. So there's a kind of inner kind of conflict going on. So we need to be honest, because of that's real sentiment people had at the time. But like I said, she's mostly involved in fundraising, using her celebrity status to raise money for war relief in China. But she also, very importantly, made two films in that period: Bombs Over Burma and A Lady from Chongqing. And the critics will regard this sort of like a propaganda films, and Hollywood actually churned out a lot of kind of anti-Japanese films and very racist, of course. Even the State Department tried to talk to Hollywood studio, producers, like tone it down a little bit because we don't want to get into this conflict with Japan right now. Because before Pearl Harbor, as you may know, America was actually not willing to get involved in another European war. Basically, right? They learned the lesson from the first one until Pearl Harbor broke out, and then it became inevitable. So Anime Wang was kind of really caught. Earlier you asked me about my method as a writer, and I really want to show, not in a sense of kind of easy contextualization, but I really want to show how one person story cannot really be told in a meaningful way without really looking at what's going on elsewhere. So even locally in Southern California, after Pearl Harbor, the fear, the paranoia, right? And where I live right now in Santa Barbara, many people don't know that Santa Barbara is the only place actually in continental USA that was actually attacked by Japanese, right? Because the Japanese submarine one day, came up and then looked at the Santa Ynez Mountains, and the submarine sent over some shells. After the shelling of Santa Barbara, it didn't cause any damage. They tried to destroy the oil refinery, but it hit mostly eucalyptus trees and and the hills. But imagine the panic at the time that the Japanese actually showed up, offshore here. So there was kind of dim out period that people cannot turn on lights, so people drive around in the dark, and pedestrians got killed as a result, not by Japanese shelling. So Anime One was, trying to do fundraising and driving around at night and going to, all these social events and everything in the context of this fear of Japanese invasion, people panicking, and then, of course, followed up by U.S. soldiers actually being sent to, to the battlefield. And so she will ended up touring the camps and joining the USO, campaign and everything. So she did all she could during those years.
So there's a million more things we could talk about, of course, but I think at this point people should just go buy your book. So can you tell people how to get a copy of your book?
Oh, it's available like they say anywhere books are sold. The book is called Daughter of the Dragon. The title is borrowed from her vintage Anime One film, Daughter of the Dragon.
Is there anything else you wanted to make sure we talk about?
I think in the context of, say, what's going on with Barbie and Oppenheimer and the writer's strike and everything, I guess her story, I want to emphasize, not just, it's multi-layered, right? It's a story of Southern California. It's a story of Hollywood, the sexism, racism, but also very importantly, ageism, which is still kind of haunt Hollywood today. But it's also really a story of America, of course, that if America falls in love with her looks, and she's really strikingly good looking, that romance really also became a taboo because of her looks. And that's really one, if there's any one line kind of story I want to tell, it is this.
Yunta, thanks so much for speaking with me today. And thank you for this terrific book. I really enjoyed learning about Anime Wong, and then started Googling her videos and started watching some of the movies. So I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Kelly.
When I sang this next song for the first time in Rome, imagine my embarrassment when my Italian went completely wrong. But the audience was most gracious and turned what I felt was failure into success. So much so, the manager stood in the wings every performance after that, muttering, "Make mistakes, make mistakes." Mr. Valley tells me the song is very popular here, under the title of Tell Me That You Love Me Tonight. I will sing a combination of the Italian and British version. Parlami d'amore, Mariù. Tutta la mia vita sei tu. Gli occhi tuoi belli brillano, fiamme di sogno scintillano. Dimmi che illusione non è, dimmi che sei tutta per me. Qui sul tuo cuore non soffro più, parlami d'amore, Mariù. Do you remember a night in September, my own? Love was around us, he came out and found us alone. Now he has left us, bereft us of all we esteem. Words that once mattered and flattered were not what they seemed, or we dreamed. Love's lost what is spoken, Cherie. Now my heart is broken, Cherie. Faded the hours I spent with you, roaming the boulevards, content with you. Once our hearts were blended, Cherie. Now our dream is ended, Cherie. And like a broken melody, love's last word is spoken, Cherie.
Thanks for listening to Unsung History. Please subscribe to Unsung History on your favorite podcasting app. You can find the sources used for this episode in a full episode transcript at unsunghistorypodcast.com. To the best of our knowledge, all audio and images used by Unsung History are in the public domain or are used with permission. You can find us on Twitter or Instagram at unsung__history or on Facebook at Unsung History Podcast. To contact us with questions, corrections, praise, or episode suggestions, please email kelly@unsunghistorypodcast.com. If you enjoyed this podcast, please rate, review, and tell everyone you know. Bye!
MSW